Hello, listeners, and welcome again to the Leading with Integrity podcast. One issue that is inescapable in the modern age is climate change. It is a big issue. It's something that I've not really had a chance to talk about much in the podcast so far. So I'm very excited to be joined today by my guest, Beth McDaniel. Beth works for a company that produces one of the leading carbon capture solutions in the coatings industry. So she's got some great insights to share. She's going to be explaining and teaching us all about how the offsetting and carbon capture world works, as well as talking a little bit about the climate technology that her company is producing. And then we're also going to cover some of the leadership lessons that she's learned from a career in various companies before that, and time as a lawyer in real estate and all sorts of other things. And I hope that you all enjoy listening.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Beth, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And I think we'll start off by me turning the mic, as it were, over to you to tell us a bit about yourself, your career history, the business you're in today, and what you get up to.
Okay. It's kind of a long history, but my history starts out, I guess I'll start with law school in my 20s. Well, I had done some business before that, actually. And then in my late 20s, I entered law school in Houston. And for reasons that were just because the job that I was in was kind of coming to a natural completion, and the project that I was on, and I was looking for something to do. And I thought, well, that might be something to do for a few years. And so I surprised myself and got accepted into a law school where I was living in Houston. And so I went. And after law school, and it was great training, because law school trains you to think in a certain way, a certain analytical way. And so it was, I've been able to apply that. I mean, I am a lawyer and I use law in my business, but I've been able to apply it to a business situation, because I don't really do outside work, and that's okay. I mean, I think a lot of lawyers don't really, or a lot of people that are going to law school don't realize you don't have to go represent other people. You can use this internally as a way to enhance your business. And in business, there's a lot of times that people don't realize that you're going to have to outsource to a lawyer for contracts and that sort of thing. And so that's the kind of lawyer that I am, is, I handle the business side of things, and I still outsource when things aren't in my wheelhouse. I'm happy to find a lawyer that does that exactly. And that's probably a good lesson. Like, not all lawyers are the same. And so you need to find one specifically that meets your needs. Anyway, my experience in law has been much more on the contract and real estate side, and just doing regular business, like an embedded attorney in a business. After law school, my brother, I've always worked in small businesses. So what you're going to hear from me is in the context of closely held businesses rather than Google or Microsoft, or that has never been. In fact, I've fought doing that, because I'm just not the one to really wear the right clothes all the time, or show up at a particular time, or I wanted to do it my way. And all the bureaucracy in those big companies was just not appealing to me. And things also move a lot slower in big companies, and I like to move a little bit faster in business. and make decisions that, we can implement right away rather than a decision and then implementation 2 years later. And that's what you'll find in big companies sometimes. They're like big ships. In fact, I had someone, we work with big companies in our company now, and I had someone at one of those companies that told us, we just can't, we're like a big ship and we can't turn really quick. What we can do, and they said, in contrast, Beth, your company is like a speedboat. And when you decide to make a change, you can turn very quickly. And so that was one of the big differences for me. And so anyway, right after law school, I got a call from my brother, who's a serial entrepreneur. And at the time he was in real estate but had never done any land development. But he calls me and he said, I've got this deal, and I tied it up 300 acres on the lake in Austin for $5,000. And I need someone to come and just go to the city and get some permits and stuff like that. He said, it'll probably be like, 3-4 weeks. And, you could come up here and do that. And I was like, sure. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just did it anyway. Well, suffice it to say that 8 years later, we got done with the project. So that was a little optimistic. We did very well. But in my job in that environment was kind of everything. I was running a lot of this land development. None of us knew how to do land development. This was just raw land in which we laid roads and utilities and got applied to get annexed into a small city that was near us so that we could get city services, that sort of thing. And so we it was all just a case of first impression, and we just made it through it and ended up and learned a lot along the way. So actually, some of the leadership lessons that I've learned were from that period, where I had knowledge from law school, but I didn't have the experience, and so there I was gaining kind of the real world experience, and that was helpful, and it all ended up okay in the end. Anyway, eventually I got married, and my husband is a crazy scientist, a brilliant genius in biochemistry and biology, and just an innovator by nature. And he's also a lawyer. He is a patent lawyer. And as you probably know, David, patent lawyers need to be scientists to begin with. You can't be a patent lawyer without being a scientist. And so he started before I came on the scene, he had started a patent law firm. And eventually I came on with his firm. And then he got the funding to start a company called Reactive Surfaces. This was back in 2001. And it's a paint innovation company. And that's what we've been doing for the last 2 decades, is innovating in the paint and coating space, an industry which most people have never thought about. I always say it's the biggest industry that no one's thought about. It's many billions of dollars are spent every year on paint, but most people just overlook it completely. And we are in the functional, what we develop is functional paints, which is kind of a new area in the paint and coatings industry. Usually paint and coatings are used to either aesthetically improve, to color a surface or to protect a surface. In fact, a coating is just a paint without color. So I use those terms interchangeably. A lot of people don't know that. But almost everything in its manufacturing, in its manufacturing process, at some point, anything man-made is coated. So if you look around you right now, the walls, obviously, that, are in your room are coated, the floors, your computer screen, your eyeglasses, even your clothing, everything that you see pretty much that's man-made, even paper products, they all have a coating on them. And what we do at our company, Reactive Surfaces, is we want to see what we can use those surfaces to functionalize them, to react to their environment in a way that we want them to. And so that's the area that we occupy. in the paint and coatings industry. You probably have more questions about it, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sure I do. But well, thank you for what a varied and long story there is there. I mean, that's some really interesting stuff there. I particularly like the 3 to 4 week project that took 8 years. I think quite a lot of people can sympathise with that. I totally agree with you about small business as well. I'm exactly the same way. And I think when I think about small businesses, I think the thing that's always attracted me to them is everyone in that business, unlike a giant corporate, everyone in that business can have an impact on what the company does.
Absolutely. Every single person is important.
Tell us more then about the carbon capture coatings that you work on, because this is the thing that I'm really interested in to learn more about.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, what are they, first of all? And then how is that such a breakthrough piece of science that's going to transform climate change, hopefully?
Okay. Yeah. So it helps in explaining what carbon capture coatings are, to go backwards a little bit into how we do this, how we occupy this innovation space in coatings. Like I said, functional coatings. So generally, what we've been doing up until 2018 was when we started developing carbon capture coatings. But prior to that, what we do in our business is we look to nature for functionality. And what we do is try to entrain that functionality into a paint or coating and ask it to do the same thing on a surface. And therefore, our surfaces become canvases, if you will, for functionality. And so I'll give you an example. We have several platform technologies. That's what we develop, or technologies that are like, might be used in a variety of different industries and different applications. So for instance, we'll use different molecules. So enzymes and peptides are some things that are things that we use regularly in our business. And so there's an enzyme that's well known in nature that's called a lipase that breaks down natural greases, fats, and oils on contact. And so what we've done is we've taken that enzyme, and the art of what we do, the art of our science, is to train that into a coating system and ask it to do, like I said, what it does in nature, but in the system, in the coating system. And so we put that into a coating system, and when it's spread on a surface, then that surface will naturally break down greases, fats, and oils. So if you have it on a kitchen counter, for instance, then and you fry up, and you stir fry, and you have grease all over your kitchen, then if you left it there, for instance, and went to sleep that night and didn't clean it up, then by the time you woke up, it would be broke down into its component parts, and you could just take a wet rag and wipe it off. It wouldn't be oily anymore. Okay. Same thing if you had it on your cell phone. If you had a coating on your cell phone and you get those nasty fingerprints and stuff like that. So this breaks those things down, and it's enzymatic. So it keeps on working over time. As long as the coating is there, then that enzymatic action will take place. So we use, in our space, we use a lot of enzymes, peptides. Nature just provides so much functionality. I mean, we have for instance, a peptide library, and peptides are good for in training antimicrobial functionality in coatings. And so we have a library of 53 million peptides. And there's all sorts of combinations of those peptides, 2/3 of which we think are functional. We haven't tried them all. We've only used a few, and they're very good at antimicrobial functionality. So for instance, where, someone sneezes on a surface, someone sneezes in the grocery store that you're shopping in, and you're worried about COVID, is actually, we found is the peptides that we use in our coating systems are good at breaking down enveloped viruses, such as the COVID virus, and other bacteria and algae, molds, yeast, those things. And so it becomes an antimicrobial surface, and you don't want to go touching those surfaces. Well, this works on contact, and so it's pretty amazing. Nature is pretty amazing, so we want to utilize that. So that's the background of what we do, and so you could see that it could be used. It's not really geared towards any one particular thing. And for instance, the peptide technology could be used in hospitals. It could be used on medical devices. It could be used in locker rooms, so there's all sorts of industries and applications that might feed off of it. What I like to think of is what we create is a ball of opportunity of innovation that could be used in a whole bunch of different ways. So what happened is in 2018, when the International Panel on Climate Change came out with that's the UN's group of scientists. So this is the foremost authority on climate change, and I'm sure you know about that. Maybe some of your listeners don't know, but the IPCC contains there's thousands of scientists, well-known scientists all over the world, and so this is the foremost authority on climate change is the IPCC. They came out with a report in October of 2018 that said that it was just so dire, and we realized, my husband and I read the report, and we realized at that time, oh my God, this is so much worse than we thought. There's got to be something. And I mean, really, Steve, my husband, went kind of comatose for about a week. I mean, he really literally just sat on the couch, and that is not his style, for about a week, just contemplating the enormity of the problem, the existentiality of this issue to humanity. And I remember he said, I can protect you and our family against anything I can think of, but I don't know if I can do this. And so anyway, it stirred us. An innovative mind is I think is jacked up when they are facing these huge problems, And so during that week, he said, I think I've got something and I want to try it. And so I know I'm getting off on a story. I hope that's okay. But this is really the genesis of how this technology took place, how we decided to go into this technology, because no one was paying us to do that. And that's another thing. In innovation, sometimes, it's a different, it's a different kind of business. It's not we're going to make 10% on this, on this product and, a 10% return every quarter or something like that. Sometimes you're innovating because you have a great idea and no one's paying you to do it, but you need to get it out there. And so this was one of those. And so he said, so he had done a lot of research in the scientific research in the Arctic. And when he was there, he had seen at one point he was traveling across this landscape, and it was just huge, gray, rocky, nothing else but rocks. And, on this landscape, and the rocks and snow and ice. And he sees a big giant rock, and it's painted red. And he felt like he thought that must be a GPS marker or something like that. So he goes over there and he looks at it, and what he sees is that it's not a GPS marker, that it's lichen. We've all seen lichen. He was so surprised that something would grow in that environment. So, it was not an environment that seemed likely to have something growing that brilliant, because it was so bright. In fact, it's on the cover of some of our articles. You'll see it on our website. But that rock was the inspiration for this technology. So he thought, that's lichen is like paint. I wonder how it really is like paint. So we started. So at this point, when we were, freaking out about the climate change situation, he put that together and he said, we need to take a look at lichen. And so we did. We looked at lichen, and lichen is, I'm going to go a little sciencey on you right now, but not too bad. Lichen is composed of two organisms. It's a fungus and an algae. The algae photosynthesize, so pull down carbon dioxide along with the help of sunlight and water, and then release oxygen and glucose. And they do that within the fungus, and the fungus protects the algae and provides it the nutrients and the gas exchange and the sunlight that it needs, but not too much UV. It's a protective organism. It's not really symbiotic, but they work together. That's how some lichen live to be 1,000 years old. And you can't even scrape them off of a rock. You see them and they're brightly colored all over the place when you go hiking or whatever, and you can't even scrape them off a rock. So they really are like paint. They're thin, they adhere well. And so we designed our paint after the lichen organism. And that is, that's what we have. We have algae. Instead of putting enzymes or peptides into a coating system, we put algae into a coating system. And things that we know how to do with paint came into play because we work with paint all the time, right? So what we did, we know how to make paint, for instance, allow sunlight in, but not too much UV. We know how to put things in paint that will absorb humidity from the air so that you don't have to sit there and water this thing down, which would be really important because it would make it not work. There would be too much water. And so we do things with paint to allow gas exchange and all this stuff. So our knowledge in the paint and coatings industry was, instrumental in being able to, put algae into the coating and make it all work. But it works great.
Looking to nature for functionality, I really love that. That is such a cool way of looking at it.
Nature's been doing it for a lot longer than us.
Well, yeah, true. I guess it hasn't been painting buildings and things, has it? But yeah.
You know what? Now that you say that, David, I'll make something clear to your listeners. People think of paint as putting it on buildings, and that's what everyone says. So you're going to put this on buildings. Eventually, that might be an option, and it's not really the highest and best use for this particular issue because we have it's just such a huge issue. What we need, so imagine the way that this technology would be used would be in a facility in which we use paint to paint as much surface area as possible to do as much work as possible. So imagine what we do is we put these we've designed modules to put painted sheets into these modules. So for instance, a module that's 1 meter cubed probably will contain something like 40 meters squared of painted surface. And so since we have such a huge problem painting it on the outside of a building where we can't control the elements and we don't get as much surface area that way, is not the highest and best use. Eventually we might do that, but what we're doing now is just trying to address the enormity of the issue and just thinking of it in terms of, put as much density as possible and just get as much paint going as possible, pulling down CO2 from the environment, from the atmosphere.
Interesting, yeah. And that kind of leads me into the next question, which is about the differences between carbon capture, storage and removal. I'm guessing paint's going to do at least two of those, isn't it?
Yeah. So, so what the paint does is it captures CO2. It can capture CO2 from the ambient air, or it could be a mitigation strategy for like point source emissions, from industrial emissions, where you take, where we could take a pipeline and put their emissions into, pipe it into our system to capture them that way. So the system can be adapted to either an emissions system or a direct air capture. Okay. And so that's one distinction. So the capture part is the part that the algae is doing. And then what it does is it fixes it in the paint and it holds it there, and the paint, the algae grow, or they duplicate within the coating system. And we watch it. We can measure it molecule by molecule. Okay. So we know how much is captured. There's gauges that we can put in there and measure how much CO2 is going down. For instance, in a 1 meter cubed, or actually in the lab, we used 1/10 meters, 1/10 meter cube module. You would see, if we were measuring it right now, by the end of this, by the end of our talk here, it would have dropped the CO2 in air, ambient air, is about 415 parts per million. And within the time that we are talking here, it would drop to about 50 in our module. Okay. So we know how much it's capturing. and then it stays fixed in the paint, and that's important. Okay, that's not the end of life. What we do is cradle to grave. Okay, so the cradle is capturing it, and the grave in a carbon removal situation needs to be that the CO2 is sequestered, and they call it durably sequestered for at least 100 years, and is not going to re-emit. So, for instance, the problem with natural carbon removal systems like forests is that when trees die, they re-emit. When algae in the ocean die, it falls to the bottom of the ocean and it re-emits the CO2. So nature does a good job of balancing itself. The situation we're in is because nature, like the oceans, they capture about as much as they emit. The land also captures about as much as it emits. The problem is we're putting about 40 gigatons or 40 billion tons of CO2 in the air from man-made things. And so that's what we're not equipped to handle. And or nature isn't doing it. Nature does its own work, okay, but it's maxed out. It's not going to pull down all this other stuff that we're emitting. So so back to the paint. So when we have the carbon dioxide has been captured, then eventually what we need to do is take that, it's captured in the form of biomass within the paint. We have a system of removing that biomass, actually breaking down the components of that, and taking that CO2 within the biomass and putting it into a system called biochar, which is called pyrolysis. You might have heard of this. And basically it's a way of burning without oxygen. And what it does is it ends up like what you end up with is kind of like a charcoal briquette at the end, and that might be broken down into a sand or something, and biochar is interesting because it can be spread over like farmland, and it has its own benefits because it absorbs moisture from the air. And so if you it's a soil amendment. Okay. So it actually helps soils become even better, carbon sinks. And so, that's our cradle to grave system. Other climate change technologies. First of all, there's, like I said, you want to make a distinction between, capturing from an emission slipstream or capturing direct air. And, but other systems are, like solvent or sorbent technologies are probably the ones you've heard of. There's a company called Climeworks, which is probably the most far along, well-known company that's doing direct air capture right now. They've got a plant up in Iceland. What most of these, so their grave though is different than our grave. And a lot of technologies that are capturing carbon dioxide, and unfortunately there's not enough. Okay. I wish there were more because there's plenty of space. We don't consider people, we consider them colleagues, not competitors, because everyone, we need as much help as we can get. And there's plenty of room in this space for all of us to fare well. But what they're doing is they're capturing CO2, but they're shoving it underground. Okay. So they're in their grave is putting it underground, a couple miles underground. The problem that we have, or the questions that arise from something like that are things like seismic activity, things like on the way down, they're passing up water tables that people use for drinking water. There's potential for big problems with it, and it's kind of viewed in the climate change world as a foregone conclusion that we can just shove it underground. We can do that with our biomass as well. Okay, we could shove that underground as well. We just don't really want to, because I think there's questions about it. A lot of oil companies use CO2 to extract more oil, and that's another thing that's going on. It's called enhanced oil recovery. And so what they're using is they're pumping CO2 under the ground. They've been doing this for years, but they're for instance, in the Permian Basin, where my husband was born here in Texas, they've got a facility that's pulling down CO2, but what they do is they shove it underground to collect more oil. So it's questionable about whether that's really a net negative situation, whether we're really pulling down more CO2 than we're adding.
Also, presumably there's a risk that at some point it's still going to be released again, isn't there?
Yeah, no, it is.
It's such a huge and in-depth problem, isn't it?
It really is. And I'll tell you how, if you don't mind, I'll even give your listeners an idea of how big the problem is. People don't think about, they hear a billion, a gigaton is a billion. If you were to think of a million days, okay, a million days ago was 2,740 years. Okay, so we're 700 BC, basically a million days ago. A billion days ago was 2,740,000 years ago. Okay, so it is a big difference. And so, for instance, that company Climeworks that I told you about is pulling down 4,000 tons right now. And they're probably the farthest along in the carbon removal world. So if that gives you any insight into the breadth of the problem and where we are on carbon removal, then, and by the way, the IPCC, going back to that, has concluded in various reports that that carbon removal is a very important part to the whole climate change formula. And so we need it, but it's, like I said, we're only pulling down 4,000 tons so far. And so we are not very far along. Yeah.
And I guess the big problem is how reliant we are on emitting technologies, isn't it? And you read about, I'm just hearing you talk, words that I've heard around kind of the offsetting of carbon, the credits, you've got this additionality, permanence, sequestration, all of these things that you've just been talking about. And then obviously there's this thing of greenwashing as well. And you have, let's not name any companies, but certain big, well-known companies who they choose things like, so one of the strategies I've read about where instead of actually removing carbon, what they're doing is mitigating carbon. So they're saying, we're not going to do this thing that would otherwise emit a whole load of CO2 or other greenhouse gases. On the one hand, yeah, that's great. Well done, guys. But wouldn't it be better if actually do something to help the existing problem instead of just not making it worse?
Right. And if you think about it in terms of like what we were talking about, that same thing I was thinking about yesterday, like even if we, in light of this issue, if all emitters were to reduce by 50% and emissions went down to 20 billion tons a year, we still got 20 billion tons to remove annually, and we're only doing 4,000. And so the mitigation alone is not enough. And that's probably the biggest misconception. People think that, everyone's trying to do something about it. And well, first of all, emissions have not gone down. Global emissions have not gone down, even in light of the problem. They went down for a few years and during the COVID crisis, and they jumped back up. So we're not emitting less. And even if we were, we still got an issue of pulling down the CO2. So yeah, it's going to require both things.
Oh yeah, 100%. Interesting tangent, but that for me is yet another argument for why we should all be working remotely. The COVID years show us what an impact that could have on the environment.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think emissions drop naturally like 15% or something like that.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing some of the satellite imagery of the emissions charts and things, and the contrast between, I think it was 2020 and 2017 maybe. And it was, the colours were completely opposite on the heat map. And it's like, how can you look at that and not understand the problem? But anyway, so what do you think are the main things then that everyone needs to know about the existing solutions to climate change?
Well, I think what I said before is what we need to encourage is more carbon removal technologies that don't necessarily involve drilling for more oil. And look, I'm not in the school of thought that we need to, or that it's possible even to completely rid our society of all petroleum-based products. Okay, I mean, plastic is petroleum-based. I mean, we would go into an economics down spiral if we didn't all of a sudden have plastic in our society, or so there's going to be some things that we just have to allow to happen and take care of it. But businesses need to clean up their mess. Okay, is the way I see it. It's become, I think that big business needs to realize that this is a cost of doing business now. Okay, and it's going to cut into their profitability, and that's just what you have to do. Everyone else is going to. I mean, we're not going to have. We're not going to be able to live the way that we want to. I mean, there will be. I hate to think about what the impacts would be, along with extreme weather, loss of species, loss of coral reefs, migration to the extent that we've never seen before, civil unrest. I mean, we're facing all of those things if we don't take this seriously. So what we hear in our business a lot of times is, the cost of carbon removal is too expensive. And so too expensive compared to what? Living? And so there's been an artificial ceiling that's been imposed on the cost of carbon removal. And so that what everyone in the financial world wants to say is, let's get, carbon removal down to $100 a ton. Or $200 a ton. Really, what they say is $100 a ton. I don't know what you can pay $100 a ton for anywhere. I don't know if you can get a ton of paper clips or a ton of sand for $100 or anything. Okay, I mean, but what they've imposed that number, and what I've heard is that number is based on what you can buy carbon dioxide for in the market. Like if you needed carbon dioxide for your soda or something like that, it costs like $100 a ton. So it's kind of mixing metaphors, and it's not really a comparable thing. But there's, in the marketplace, whoever is just making all these decisions have decided that that's the price that carbon removal should be, and I strongly object to that. And there, we might be able to get it down to that. Our cost of carbon removal, and this has been done by an outside third party. There's what's called a life cycle analysis and a techno-economic analysis, and these things have to be done in order to verify the process and how much it's going to cost, and whether it's cradle to grave and all that. Ours came out to about $600 on pure direct air capture. And so there's all sorts of ways we expect to get that number down using, economies of scale and just improvements generally. But we get hit with that a lot. Well, that's just too expensive. Well, first of all, there's no one out there that's doing it for $100. No one. Okay. Climeworks, if you go on their website, is selling carbon credits for $1,200. Okay. And they're, like I said, the farthest along. And I'm not coming down on Climeworks. Okay. I'm happy that they're doing what they're doing. Like I said, I think we need all the help that we can get. It's just unrealistic that the market is imposing this low number and then rejecting a lot of technologies that would otherwise do the job, because they've decided on this artificial number of $100 that no one's achieving.
Yes. It does seem a bit spurious, doesn't it? And I think what a better way of doing it is look at the cost of not doing it.
I know. That's exactly right, David. I know. I mean, because what, are your grandchildren not worth $600 a ton?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. I mean, but you even just look at even like tiny changes in the climate. I mean, the impact that can have on agriculture, on human health, on all sorts of things. And there's costs associated with that. Healthcare isn't free. If agriculture takes a hit, we can't feed ourselves. So we were talking drastic stuff
a bit earlier, and I mean, one thing, when the ice shelf in the Arctic melts, what we're facing is, there are buried viruses that have been encapsulated in ice for all these years, and all of that stuff was coming out. So yeah, there are health impacts, like real health impacts that we were going to be facing. So the impacts are devastating if we don't do something. And I hate to be in that, I hate to be such a downer about it. I think there are things that can be done, but we have to have the political will, and we have to, defer resources to those technologies that can, not just ours, but all technologies that can help us out of this situation.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? That there are technologies there, the solutions do exist, and it is largely, as you say, it's a question of the political will and get rid of these kind of false economic arguments for it.
Right.
The economic thing that you mentioned, and for me, it's cars, isn't it? So there's probably a reasonable majority of people who would prefer to have low emitting cars. But the trouble is the market has inflated the price of those vehicles compared to other fuels. I couldn't go and buy an electric car today for the same price as the cheapest available petrol car. And so almost you don't have a choice. You have to emit.
Yeah.
Even despite your best intentions, the market is forcing it in that direction still.
That's right.
Worrying stuff. Okay, so the next question then is, what can we do as business leaders, as managers, as entrepreneurs to make sure that our organizations are having a real and positive impact on climate change?
I'd like to say as an individual, there's a lot you can do. Okay. But there's not a lot of impact that's going to come even if all of us drove electric cars, just because of, the size of the problem. But what big business does and what governments do is extremely important. And what they incentivize and putting a carbon tax on things, on emissions, and those sort of things are really, really important, and that will make the impact. So if I had, as a big company, I would say definitely, they got to get real about it. For instance, like I was talking to the sustainability officer for a local airport, and what he said is, well, we buy carbon offsets, for our emissions, and what they were, and I said, well, how much are you paying? And he was paying $5 a ton for his carbon offsets. Well, those carbon offsets are not doing any good. So where companies are greenwashing and making it appear to their shareholders that they're doing something, unfortunately, like if it's $5 a ton, first of all, that's not, it's probably old. It's probably already been used. It's not necessarily an additional technology like you were mentioning. So for instance, if you weren't going to cut down that forest, but in the first place, and then you just apply for a carbon offset for not cutting down that forest, well, that's not additional. It wasn't going to happen to begin with. And what's happening is if someone buys that carbon offset on the commodities market, then they're allowed to emit another ton of CO2. So it worsens the problem, really. Okay. And so what we don't want to worsen the problem. We need to get all of those bad carbon offsets out there that aren't doing anything, and that people are relying on in order to emit. So companies need to get real. I mean, I told that guy, you need to put your big boy pants on, okay, because you're worsening the problem. He was not happy. But it's true. Like what really? I mean,
I can imagine.
You're spending $20,000, on these a year. You're not doing anything. You're making it worse. And then the governments need to put carbon taxes on companies to ensure that what that does is it gives them the incentive to do the right thing, or else they're going to pay the tax anyway. So they might as well go ahead and lower their emissions, or capture their carbon dioxide or something. And back to what individuals can do is, I think the best thing that an individual can do is pick up their phone, call their lawmaker, and tell them that they are that this is an important issue to them, and that they want real change in this area, that they want a carbon tax. And I used to do a lot of advocacy. And I did it in schools. I used to take 6th graders in to meet with lawmakers, and you'd be surprised. First of all, every lawmaker who gets a phone call is recording that, okay, if it's from their district. And so they're recording that as one person who called. That one person represents so many other people in their district that they're going to count cares about that issue. So it really does count when you call, or when you send a letter, or when you go pay a visit to your lawmaker and tell them that this is your concern.
Interesting. I wouldn't have been my first thought, but yeah, couldn't hurt, could it? Yeah, the carbon offsetting in particular, it's been getting a lot of bad press, hasn't it? Particularly of late. I don't know if you've seen the same sort of headlines in the States as we have in the UK, but I think there's maybe 2 or 3 verification agencies, I guess you could call them. They're not really accrediting anything, are they? Real sense of it, but
well, that's the problem, is that there really hasn't. There has the credits get old. The CO2 was already pulled down, and then someone's using it later, and it wasn't really, someone riding their bike to work didn't really pull, for a year, didn't really pull that CO2 down. Okay. And so anyway, some are they're just very fuzzy. And hey, we're on the pathway to get our carbon offset accreditation as well with the gold standard. And so the certification agencies are important, but they do need to focus on the reality of it. And so something, a force that's re-emitting or something like that is not doing us the good that we think it is.
Yeah, I guess more emphasis on not just verification, but doing it regularly enough, particularly if as the example you gave, where you're just saying, I'm not going to cut down those trees, or if I don't do this, then those trees will get cut down. Those kind of loopholes, let's call them.
Yeah.
They need to actually be verifying things. And this article I read a few weeks ago about there's a very high percentage of issued credits that actually that forest was never under threat, or the project they're talking about was like 100 miles away or something, and people are just gaming the system because they've realized there's a bit of money to be had there. And it's all a bit cynical, really.
Yeah. and some things can't be measured very well. And so there are definitely problems. And then there are social justice issues. There are issues there. If a solution, a carbon offset solution is displacing people from valuable farmland, that's not a great issue. And if it's too imposing too much on the indigenous people, for instance, of that area that haven't even contributed generally as much to the problem, then that needs to be considered as well. Just to throw it out there, we're planning on, when we scale to the million and the billion ton level, we plan to go to places that have farmers. We want to employ the farmers in the local areas, because those are the people that know how to make stuff grow. And what we're doing is growing stuff in paint, and we can teach them how to do it. So we plan on incorporating local talent into everything that we do around the world. And we're big on social justice and equality.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it sounds amazing. And best of luck with it all. The nice thing is that there are things we can do, at least. So let's try and end that bit on an optimistic note, at least.
Yeah, and let's push our lawmakers and our corporations to do the right thing, because they're the ones that are going to have the impact on a gigaton scale.
Yeah. First leadership question is, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your career so far?
Wow, there are so many. How would I pick? I think a really good lesson is know what you can do and then outsource what you can't. Okay. And find people who do well. It's not just about money. It is about excellence, and especially in innovation. So for instance, we have hired, we've always been in a pattern, like we're in the paint business. So we have we're in the paint business and the biochemistry business. And so we have polymer scientists, microbiologists, biochemists on our team. But when it comes to engineering a module, well, we have to reach out. We're not the best to do that. So we know that's not in our wheelhouse. So outsource what you don't do and find people who do it the best. We have the best algae experts in the world on our team. And we're in biology, but we still reached out because we wanted to have that level of excellence. So that's one of the things. Just in generally, like running a business, I would say, make everyone important. I mean, we're like the context from which I'm talking again is a small, closely held business. Okay. And so everyone, like you said, has a place in that, and they have to be important. Everyone is important in that business. And so everyone has to be doing their stuff. And making sure that all of those pieces are coming together is really important in our business. We don't have there's no slack, there's no phantom working. I knew a guy that was in a big company. I have a friend, and he went and worked from home for a while during COVID, and they forgot about him, and he was still getting a paycheck, and they weren't even giving him any work, and he was just sitting there receiving a paycheck.
Wow. A lot of people would say that was quite lucky, but
yeah, good if you can land something like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's not going to happen in a closely held business. Everyone has to pull their weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think making sure they know how important they are as well, not just.
Yes,
I mean, again,
do the best that they can, and I definitely am not a top-down leader. I definitely I hire good people, and so I want their input, and we all come together. For instance, when we're innovating, and that's what we do. We have weekly meetings, and we come together and we bring our team in. So we bring the tech team, we bring the IP team, we bring the sales team, we bring the lead, the directors or the managers, us, and we all come together. And so, for instance, we sometimes the IP team will say, well, and when I say IP, I mean intellectual property, because we are an intellectual property firm. So we protect everything along the way as we go. But they might give us some input that says, no, if we develop it that way, it's not going to be protected. And so all of these things come into the innovation process. And same with sales. We want the salespeople, we want to know what they're hearing in the market, and how we can fit into our customers' needs and that sort of thing too.
Yeah. So giving everyone a voice, I guess, the empowerment, the autonomy, all the nice things, which a lot of the more traditional managers would argue against that, because they would say, if you let people know how important they are, then they've got you over a barrel when they want a pay rise. But I firmly disagree with that point of view, I have to say.
I do too. Be more careful in your selection of people.
Absolutely.
My dad used to say, slow to hire, quick to fire. And that sounds pretty cold. And he was exactly the opposite. He was one of the best leaders I've ever known. And, but what it means to me and what it meant to him is be very careful who you hire and find the exact right person that you're looking for. But if you find someone who's not a cultural fit or is not doing their job or is, impacting negatively on everyone, then cut it off, cut it loose. Don't let it, ferment in your culture, because it's going to cause more damage.
Yes, completely agree with that. Yeah. I think there's a balance to be had with this slow or quick to hire, definitely, because I think it is quite easy as well to go too far the other way, and you just never fill the role because you're holding out for the perfect person who doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah, no, I've done it. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the theory. Yeah,
but definitely agree. As soon as you realise that someone's not the right fit, just move on.
Yeah, and it's best for them probably too.
Yeah, I think so in the long run, because you're not doing them any favours by keeping them in a role that they don't fit. You're gonna stifle them as well, aren't you? Really.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be then your own best and worst experiences of leadership in the workplace? Doesn't have to be your current workplace, obviously. Anything in your career so far.
Let's see. I'll start with the worst. One time I was, when I was in-house counsel for a small, closely held company after law school, I was young and I didn't really realize, I didn't have the leadership experience that I do now. But I remember like someone, and he was a bad apple. Okay. We kind of had a bad apple that was starting some problems and stuff, but I let myself like erupt and I yelled and I screamed at him. And then after he was gone, like I kind of was talking about, I was threatening, well, we're going to sue him and all this stuff. Well, to the other employees, all of that was a big ball of wrong. Okay. First of all, I'm not like that anyway. And so I was kind of feeling like, well, I better like exert this, bossiness if I'm going to be the boss, and I better like show them my, command of the situation. And it didn't work that way at all. So, and for some people, it might work better because it might be more natural. I've never done it again. I've never yelled at anyone in a workplace again. And, in fact, I had someone walk out and quit that day. She had just started that day and she was like, I'm not staying here. Y'all are crazy.
Oh, that's quite a first day, isn't it? Ouch.
Yeah, an example of the worst of me. And lawyers also have to be particularly careful about what they threaten. So following the person leaving, I shouldn't have been talking about it with anyone else. Okay. I mean, you don't need to just information that doesn't, that's not advancing the situation doesn't need to be out there. So I didn't need to be talking about it with the other employees or anything like that. So I learned real quick that was just a bad example of leadership. Good leadership, I think, is, what we've done at Reactive Surfaces, and that is we've really bolstered those people that are on our team. And one thing that we do different than a lot of the big companies is on the innovation side. We don't just incentivize our salespeople. We incentivize innovation. We're an innovation shop, and we want people to open their minds. We want people to drive to the limits of their thinking and use all of what they know and what they've learned. And for that reason, we've kept people around for decades, or in some cases, and they really do a good job. They probably could be making maybe more money somewhere else, but they like to be in a position where they can innovate and they can be appreciated. If we can seize that quickly, rather than it just slowly, just like the big ship. Okay, we can implement things a lot quicker because we're smaller.
I like both of those examples. Your bad experience, yes. I wasn't expecting it to be you personally who had done it, but partly though it goes to show that everyone has their kind of limit, don't they? And anyone can be pushed to or over that limit by the wrong situation. So,
and they can be pushed into the right situation too.
Absolutely, yeah. And either way, I think taking the lesson from it is the most important thing. So, right. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. Okay. All right. Next question then. So you've talked a lot about the scientific background, and obviously there's a very tech focus to the business. Those kinds of industries are pretty notorious, at least in the UK, probably in the US as well, I suspect, for being quite male heavy, shall we say? So what's it like being a female executive in a science and tech company? And what advice would you have for young women who might be considering a similar career path?
Well, I found this in tech somewhat, and definitely in land development when I was doing that for 8 years, is being underestimated. And sometimes take those negative responses, and that way I would just be overlooked, or, I was just dumb blonde, doesn't know anything. And I would take that and flip it on its head and use that to my advantage. So, because when you're underestimated, then you can sneak up, you can do a sneak attack, they don't see it coming. And so, just don't underestimate yourself just because other people are underestimating you. And, so I probably put up with more of that than I should, but I'm not super confrontational personally. And so, trying to change somebody else never really seemed to do much for me or my situation. And so I just tried to use their actions and their attitudes against them and to my advantage, not against them, but just to my advantage. In technology, there are more women in science in technology than, probably there have been in past years. But I think that, what people want to see that now. And so don't be afraid of it, just go for it. And I just think, I don't have a lot of feelings that women aren't as capable. I don't have that ingrained in me. So it's never really stopped me. I'm just, it's never really caused me to pause or anything. And so I just think, do what you do. And if you're not getting treated equally, then yeah, you need to fight for that. And there are ways to do that. And there are certain certainly laws and such. But if you're just being underestimated, just don't worry about it. That's their problem. Their issue.
I think, absolutely. I mean, don't let others define what you're going to do, I think is the key message, isn't it? Yeah,
I just didn't really care what they thought.
Yeah, well, that's the best way to be, isn't it? I mean, you're saying, if you're not getting equality, then be prepared to fight for it. I mean, the other option is go somewhere where you're going to get it.
Exactly.
If your organization doesn't offer it, it's their loss when you leave, isn't it? So
exactly. Yeah. And there's a lot of smaller companies where you might find, be flexible then, if you're not getting what you want in a large company, then, be flexible, take a risk.
100%. Yeah.
Leadership Heroes.
Awesome. Well, we're almost out of time, so I have one last question, which is the only question that every guest is asked without modification. So I call it Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick one person, be anyone you like, alive, dead, past, present, real, fictitious, if you want to be a bit crazy about it, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
There are business leaders that I admire. There's Bill Gates. I know you're asking for one person. I don't know if I have that one person, but I admire business leaders that also take on responsibility for, in Hebrew they say tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. Okay, and I think that if you are in a position of power, and even if you're not, but definitely if you're in a position of power, you have an obligation to society, to community, to humanity, to make things better. And I've seen that in, in the work that Bill Gates does. I don't know what kind of boss he is. And I don't know if he's a good guy or not, as far as whether I'd be friends with him. But I do know that he's done he's made a world of difference, like where in global health. And he's taken it upon himself, and other leaders do. Warren Buffett, and, also take it upon themselves. There's one guy that I do actually have a deep level of admiration for, but he's not a business leader, so to speak. I guess he probably is. He's a doctor. His name is Dr. Denis Mukwege, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. He's in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And he is he's a gynecologist that has set up a hospital called the Panzi Hospital. And the Congo is known as the worst place in the world for a woman to live in. Okay. Rape is used as a weapon of war there. And he has set up a hospital not only to treat physically women that have been subject to, this kind of violence. But also he's just so holistic in the way that he treats them. I mean, at every level, there's treatment for the family, there's treatment for the community, there's treatment, there's job opportunities, there's psychological help that he gives them. He just approaches his business in a holistic manner, and that's what I hope to do.
Great example. And probably quite a dangerous thing to do as well in that part of the world. So there's certain bravery involved there too.
Yes. Oh yeah, there's death threats all over.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. That's another new pick as well. We've not had that one before, so you get extra points for that. Well done.
Have you had dates before?
I don't think I have, actually. But again, a good pick. And I mean, I've been following the work that the Gates Foundation does for quite a few years. And I mean, they're in all sorts of things, aren't they? There's the health aspect, there's the agriculture, there's poverty. They do it all, don't they? Yeah. Really impressive stuff.
Yeah. It's not just about making money. It really isn't.
No, it's using the money for good, isn't it? Once you've made it. Yeah.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Well, thank you again so much for your time. I think the last thing I do is, if you want to point any of the listeners towards your website or a book, if you've written one, or your own podcast or anything like that, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, you'll find them. If they want to learn more about what we do, then they could go to our website. It's reactivesurfaces.com, and that's surface like the surface of a table, not services. And in the technology section, they can find out about carbon capture coatings and other technologies that we have. And then, we have a peer-reviewed journal, and all that stuff is on the website. And I will put the link for that in the episode description as well, so people can find it easily. Well, that's been great. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. Yes, David, I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Beth, for a brilliant conversation. I certainly learned a fair bit more about climate change and carbon sequestration there. So much appreciated for all of your knowledge and insight and sharing that with us. And listeners, if you would like to learn more about Beth's company and about carbon capture coatings, I have put the website, as promised, in the episode description. So I do encourage you to click on that, take a look, and learn more. Give some of those journals a read. If anything you've heard today about leadership has been interesting or struck a chord, if you are working in a tech or science-driven business, if innovation is happening in the company where you're working, and you either are a leader but are struggling with it, or you want to be a leader, then Leading with Integrity is for you. So please do click the other link in the episode description, take a visit to my own website, and see if there's something there that might be useful for you. And feel free to reach out and get in touch if that's the case. And that's it from me today. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you'll join me again next time. And in the meantime, stay safe. Have a think about what you can do to help with climate change. There have been some tips in this episode, no pressure. And remember to be a leader, not a boss.